In this presentation, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a simple power-up strategy for our marble game. Now, at this point, I'm not going to spend a lot of time demonstrating every click inside Unity and Playmaker, but I will kind of emphasize some workflow issues, and I will emphasize some basic strategies that I've used for my logic for this. So the hope is that you'll kind of take these basic concepts and experiment with them and come up with your own solutions for this. So now, before I press forward with the power up, I do want to point out that I have been iterating or incrementing my level design here, and you'll notice that I'm working actually on level 07 at this point. So every time I make some forward progress, I'm saving the level that I'm working on and doing a file save scene as, and I'm building a new level. That way, in the event that I inadvertently destroy the level or I corrupt a level, I don't have all of my level in one basket or one scene file, so I can take a step back, and in the event that I lose something or destroy something or corrupt something, I can pick it up from a previous scene. So this is just a way to kind of preserve and build a history into my workflow. That's why I have so many levels. These are actually all just kind of simple variation on the basic level design that I have here. So I'm still kind of considering this level 1. So maybe I would build variation on this naming convention and do level 1 underscore ABC or underscore 123. But for now, I'm just kind of managing the simple flow of my level design. Now, once I get my level where I want it, I'm going to clean things up, and I'm going to purge some of these older levels, and I'm going to rename some of the levels that I use. So just wanted to get you oriented to what my scene looks like. Now, I have made a really basic, simple level, again, based on some of the examples that we've looked at, and I have my goal off in the corner here. The player spawn is over here, where the camera is starting or composed. And the idea is just to kind of move around the level and reach the goal. Now, I would make a more complex and challenging level, but again, I'm focusing on kind of still wireframing the concept here. Now, in order to start talking about the power-up system that I'm going to employ, I want to point out that on my player object, I've implemented a simple jump. Now, I have my jump set up in its own FSM. I have my controller set up in one state machine, and I have my player jump control in another state machine. And the jump control is really simple. It's just a simple state machine that listens for a key down. It's listening, in this case, for the space button. And when it hears that input from the user, it fires off the jump event. Now, I've then wired it over to this jump event, and where I do a simple add force. I add a lot of force along the y-axis. I don't do it every frame, so we just simply press the spacebar. It passes to the jump state here. When it's finished, I'll wire this back to the idle state for a moment. This is the simple jump loop. We have an idle listening for space press. We pass it off to a jump state where it fires off the jump. In the Y direction, you can even move it forward, in the forward direction if you want to, but I like the simple control of launching this in the Y direction. Now, to test that, I'll just press the spacebar. Now, I've added an additional state because, as you can see, if I mash the space button a few times, I have a double jump or kind of this infinite jump mechanic. And I wanted to correct for that. And so what I did is, during the idle state, we press the spacebar, we pass it off to the jump. And then when the jump is finished, I pass it through a third state, which is just a real simple collision detection. So it's a collision event. And on collision with any untagged object, and I have pretty much everything untagged with the exception of the player object. So the ground is untagged, all these different tiles, the little level tiles that are snapped together are all untagged. And so once it encounters pretty much anything, it fires off this reset event. And so the effect is that when we're in the air, we launch from the idle state into the jump state, and we actually don't reset, so we don't listen for the spacebar input until we're back on the ground. So the idea here is that when I press the spacebar once, if I continue to mash on it, the spacebar, I'm not going to be able to jump again until I actually come into contact with something else. So just a real simple double jump control there, or correction for an infinite jump or double jump. So that's my jump, but I don't want the player to be able to jump until they pick up some sort of power up. So I've modeled this real simple capsule here, and this capsule is going to be my pickup object. So I have this little power up object. It doesn't do anything just yet. It has a simple box collider on it. I have the box collider attached to an empty game object, and then I have this pill object, and it has a bottom and a top half. So I just took a capsule in Cinema 4D, and I brought that in and applied some simple textures to it inside Unity and threw that in an empty game object. Now what I'll do is I'm going to build a real simple state machine, and maybe I'll have a simple control that simply does a rotation first. So I have this idle state, and this will both listen for the trigger event, and it will also rotate the object. So I'll just build a real simple rotation. I'll add the rotation, and we'll use the owner object. We can rotate it in itself or in the world space. It doesn't really matter. But I'll rotate it around the Y. And I'll do this, let's try 30 degrees per second. And I'll hit the play button and see what that gives us. That feels pretty slow. That's rotating way too slow. So I'm going to go back, and I'll bump this up, let's say, let's try 180 degrees per second. And that's more the speed that I'm looking for. So I got this thing that's rotating. That starts to draw the user attention towards to the player. Now, I do want to mention that I kind of launched here when I'm waiting, and this gray cube has just a timed add force. So even though I can't jump, I can't press the spacebar, when I'm on certain platforms, they might launch me in one direction or another. So just kind of like a little hidden thing that I've embedded. I don't have that indicated in the visual design of the tile yet, but I'll address that in a short bit. So currently, if I bump into my pickup, it's not a pickup, it's not a trigger object, so I simply have it rotating. I need to go in and make sure that this box collider is trigger, and so not only am I rotating, but then I'm also going to listen for a trigger event. So I'm just at this point, I'm just kind of searching for these key actions here. So I want to listen for a trigger event, and I want to listen for a collision with the player. So I'll screen for the collider tag of player, and then I want to create a send event. So I'll go into events, and I'll create a simple pickup event. I'll go back into my state, and I'll fire off the pickup event when I trigger this object. So I'll add that as a transition, and I'll add this as a state. And just like we have in the previous project, when I pick this thing up, I want to destroy the game object. So I'll do a quick search for destroy, and I want to destroy self. But in addition to destroying self, I also want to modify a setting. Now, there's a couple different ways that I can control the power-up. In the case of this power-up, I want to be able to turn on and off the ability to jump. And there's a couple different ways that I can do that. I think the simplest way to do this is I'm going to go back to my player object, and I'm going to go back to the state machine that has the player jump ability. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build into this loop, I'm going to build in a simple test that checks a variable. The variable that I want to check, I'm going to go to variables, and I'm going to create a new global variable. And the global variable that I'm going to create, and the reason I want to create this as global is because it's going to be very easy for other state machines to talk to this variable. So I want the power up when I collide with this thing. I want to be able to change this variable, and I want the player jump mechanic to be able to read this variable as well. And I'm going to call this variable player can jump. And I'm going to take a look at the bool variable. Now the bool variable, I'll just add this. I'll select my player can jump, and the bool variable is very simple. It's if I look at the bool value, it's either true or false. And I'm going to start off in the false setting. Okay, so this variable is either true or false, and I can check against it, and I can switch it back and forth between true and false. Now In the event of power-ups or a function that we want to turn off and on, this is really a great variable. So that's a global variable. I'm going to close this. I don't need to reference it for a short minute. I'm going to go back to my player jump, and what I'm going to do is when I press the spacebar, so when I leave the idle state, so I press the spacebar, I want to pass it through an additional state. And this state, I'm going to say check for jump, or check to see if player can jump, or whatever I want to call this. And so when I press the spacebar, I actually want to pass it to this check for jump state. And what this state is going to do is, I think it's in logic here. If I go into logic, yep, there it is. I can do a bool test. I'll double click. And what I can do is we can test this bool. I'm going to test the global player can jump bool, and I'm going to test to see if it's true or if it's false. If it's true, I want to allow the player to jump, so I'll wire it up to this jump. And if it's false, I want to go right back to the reset. Okay, and then we'll explore this logic here in just a moment. So I'm going to create two events, and I have two events created here to kind of speed this up. I have don't jump and jump, and so I'm going to go back to my state. And if it's true, I want to be able to jump, and if it's false, I want to say don't jump or can't jump. Now I'm not going to test this every frame because this will be tested whenever we press the spacebar. It's going to pass it off to this state. What I do need to do is I need to add both of those transitions, the don't jump and the jump. And I want to take the don't jump and I want to wire that back to the idle state. I want to take the jump state and I want to wire that back to jump. And so maybe I'll just slide these around and kind of reorganize this. So let's look at the logic here. So in the idle state, we're still listening for that space bar down. So I'm listening for a jump. And when we do press the space bar, we're going to fire off the jump transition, which sends it down to this new state where we check the value of this bool. If it's set to true, in other words, if we're saying, yeah, you can jump, then we're going to pass it off to the jump action, or the jump state, which adds the force, and then passes it through the second state, which listens for that double jump collision, or it listens for a collision with any object before it passes back to idle. Because remember, this action isn't going to fire, or it's only going to fire one time per space, or more appropriately, one time per space when we're in the idle state. So if we're in the idle state and we press the spacebar, we're going to pass it to check for jump. Now, if it's false, we're just going to pass it right back to the idle state. So in other words, we're going to say, nope, you can't jump, go back to idle. So if I press the play button right now, you'll notice that when I press the spacebar, if you look down here in my state machine, it's just looping back to the idle state every time I hit space. And the reason is because that bool, that global variable bool, the player can jump, is set to false. Well, if I set it to true, watch what happens. Hit the play button. Now when I'm on the ground and I hit the play button, I can jump. Okay, so now I have this variable that's telling this component whether or not it works or not, okay, or whether or not it can jump. And so I want this player can jump, this bool, I want to make sure that its default state or its starting state is in the false state. And now I can close that. Now, I'll just test this. So I want to make sure my player cannot jump. I'm pressing the space and I cannot jump. What I want to do is when I run into my little power up here, my pickup that I just ran into, I'll go back to my power up. What I want to do is once I fire off this pickup state where I destroy the object, not only do I want to destroy the object, but I want to switch the can jump bool variable to true. So in other words, I pick up this power up and all of a sudden now I have the ability to jump. So let me rename this state. We'll say can jump and destroy. So this state is controlling that it can switch on the jump and then it destroys itself. So what we need to do is we need to go and we need to set a bool. So I forget what category that's in, so I'm just going to type in set bool, and I see that it's a math value. The set bool value can be found in the math field, which is where you set most variables, and I'll just double click to add that. And the bool variable that we want to adjust is a global variable, and it's the can jump. And we want to set the bool value to true. Now, when we're setting the bool value, there's a little bool value field here, and if it's off, it's false. And if it's checked, it's true. So the effect of this action is that when it's idling, it's rotating the power-up object, it listens for a trigger with the player object. When that happens, it fires off this can jump and destroy. Now the only glitch here is that it's going to destroy itself before it has a chance to set this bool value, because remember, these actions happen in order. And they happen so fast that if it destroys itself, it won't have a chance to run that set bool. So I want to make sure that the set bool is on top or happens before it destroys itself. In fact, what we could do is we could add a second state, and we could do something like finished and pass this through. And in this state, we could set the jump, and in this state, we could set the destroy, if that made a little bit more sense, or if this was a little bit more clear. But I know that we can get away with doing this all in one state, so I'm just going to reset this back to its original design, which is set bool and then destroy itself. So once we set this bool, we should be able to jump. So I'm pressing the space bar, take my word for it. I'm pressing the space bar and I can't jump. And now when I come and pick up this object, it's gone, and now I can jump. So that's the basic concept, or one of the basic ways that we can control powering up or turning functionality on. Okay, so I could also start to adjust variables, like if I pick up another object, I could set the value of speed. So if you remember way back when, in one of the early presentations, back in my player control is adding a force value. Well, let's see. It's actually in one of these values. There's a speed. We'll find it. There's a multiplier in here somewhere. I'm using speed in here to, or maybe actually I'm not using it just yet, but oh yeah, I am. Here it is. Okay, so in the multiplier, in the get access vector, that's the listening for the user input, the multiplier is set to a player speed variable. Now that was something that I set up a long time ago. That was under variables, global variables, player speed, and the default player speed is set to 40. Now, if I wanted more power or more force, when I'm controlling my player, all I have to do is bump up that value of speed. So again, speed is really the force that I'm using to apply on this player. I fell into my lava, so I'm going to respawn. So if I want to bump that value up, let's say when I hit this question mark, if I can hit it, I just missed it. And I can't jump yet because I didn't pick up the power up. But maybe I run into this little question mark here, and that question mark does a little pickup command just like our other power up, but instead of turning a bool on, maybe it increases the value of speed by doing a little math function on it, just like we did with our health manager. So start thinking in terms of variables that you can influence that might enhance the player capabilities. Maybe you can fly temporarily, maybe you can just increase your speed, maybe you can jump further, or maybe you turn off that double jump correction. So it's going to be up to you to experiment with this and come up with a couple of power-ups that you can play with. So that's just a really kind of high-level overview and a basic strategy about how you can start to implement these power-ups. So as is always, make sure that you're building works in progress builds, post them to the discussion board. If you have any questions, post those to the discussion board as well, and we'll continue to look at some of the requirements for this project and solutions to solve those requirements in the next presentation.